We've been investigating miniatures painted by Isaac Oliver, who was one of the best limners of the late 16th century, because he's a really interesting character and not very much is known about him. He's supposedly was a pupil of Nicholas Hilliard, who's very well known and wrote a treatise about the art of limning, but Oliver frustratingly never wrote anything about his training or about his work. And so while a lot has been done on Hilliard, because you can compare what he wrote with what he did in his miniatures, there's very little that has ever been done with Isaac Oliver. He's much more of an unknown personality, and that was one of the reasons why we were really interested in him. Luckily, the Fitzwilliam Museum has a small number of miniatures painted by Isaac Oliver, so that's how we started working on him. And the results we were getting from the initial analysis were so interesting that we liaised with collections across the UK and also elsewhere in Europe. And these collections have granted us the possibility to work on their miniatures as well. So we've been doing technical analysis with a number of different scientific methods, including various types of imaging, such as near-infrared and UV imaging, and very detailed photomicroscopy, so we can get really high resolution details of the miniatures, which is really important because these objects are very, very small, usually only about 5 by 4 centimeters, more or less. And so the details are so minute that it's really hard to appreciate them with the naked eye. We've been using a range of spectroscopic methods to investigate the materials composition of the miniatures, specifically the pigments used by the artist. And one of the methods we've been using a lot is XRF, X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, which gives the elemental composition of the pigments. So what we're doing today with the Bruker ELIO is performing an XRF scan, which means we get an XRF spectrum at every single point on the miniature, about every millimeter or so. And that's really great because we can not only identify the elemental composition of various points in the miniature, but we can also get maps of the elements. And that really helps, especially in cases like the one we're investigating now, where the original composition was slightly modified at a later time because the pigments degraded and the miniature was damaged. And so we have successive layers of pigments, and it's really difficult to sometimes isolate these layers if you don't have a map that can help you sort of guide your investigation. So we're really fortunate to be able to use the Bruker ELIO in this instance because our own XRF instrument only does point analysis, so we can analyze single points but not get the maps, which are so helpful in finding out what the composition really is across the whole miniature. And they're also a great tool for outreach and dissemination of results, because images are a great way to disseminate even very complex scientific information. So we're really happy that we can do that. And the fact that the ELIO is a portable instrument is really key in our case. Despite the fact that we're working at the Fitzwilliam Museum today, so in a museum environment, a lot of miniatures collections are actually spread out across country houses, for example, or in national trust properties, in small private collections. So in places where it wouldn't be feasible to transport heavy machinery, hard, big pieces of equipment, and it's not always appropriate for the miniatures to travel to a laboratory space. They're very fragile objects. They're very sensitive to the environment, so they need to be kept at a very cool temperature and high humidity, because they're painted on parchment that is animal skin, which reacts to humidity in particular very, very much. So it's great to be able to transport your equipment to the collection rather than the other way around. And we're finding more and more, not just in research on miniatures, but in our work, for example, on medieval manuscripts as well, that we do a lot of traveling with our equipment.